Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Weekly Business Hour. I'm Rick Schisler. I'm your host. I'm a Silver Fox advisor, as well as the founder of OneBestConsult.com. I'm glad you've taken this opportunity to listen to our show today. I think we have a wonderful guest. We've got some great topics to dig into, so get comfortable and open those ears and get ready to take some notes. I think there's going to be some things that we talk about today that, in particular, could be ideas and methods that you could possibly use even today in your own business. We're broadcasting today from the studios of Lone Star Community Radio, which is located in downtown Conroe, Texas, Montgomery County. Lone Star Community Radio is a nonprofit. And what does Lone Star broadcast? It broadcasts everything involving the community. It's got a bevy of shows. Encourage you, go to their website. It's irlonestar.com. That's irlonestar.com. And they've got all kinds of shows, music, but it is a connection It is a connection to the community that if you live in and around Montgomery County, that you need to have on your playlist to stay active and stay connected with what we're doing right here in Montgomery County. Quick thought before we move into our conversation with our guest. Big impact on small businesses. Is it or isn't it? That's my question. Over the past few days, oil has made its way back into the news. It was funny. I read a timeline, if you will, of articles. And Tuesday, Wednesday of last week, the price of oil was predicted to go down. But by Friday, Saturday, it was predicted to go up, which is interesting. Oil impacts every business, some more than others. And what I am challenging you to do is think about how oil impacts your business, whether it's products, things you buy. If you're in the service business, gasoline is important. Some businesses, you don't even see it. But if you have anything plastic, it affects you. But again, those that use it as a fuel are probably more impacted. Be aware, the price of oil, if last week doesn't tell you anything, is moving up and down, up and down. And my theory and historical proof is that when it's in that kind of mode, it's either going to go way up or way down eventually. It'll one day just pop through. Typically, in the world we live in today, it'll be a geopolitical situation that'll happen that we either expected or didn't expect. So be sure, if oil is real important to your business, be sure to keep an eye on it. It's moving, my friends. Reminder, this show is broadcast live on YouTube. Go to YouTube if you want to watch as well as listen. Just look up the Weekly Business Hour page, click on the button, and you can watch as well as listen to the program. That happens to be the format I enjoy more than just listening. Also want to let you know that if you have a question about the show, about a guest, just a business question for your business, drop me an email. This is very important to me. I enjoy getting those emails and I enjoy responding to each and every one. The address is simple. It's Rick, R-I-C-K, at irlonestar.com. That's Rick at irlonestar.com. And for those of you who do send a question about your own business, we have a segment from time to time on the show called the mailbag. And we actually choose a question that was submitted and talk about it on the air and hopefully provide an answer or two that would help you solve that issue for you. So please send in your inquiries about business, the Weekly Business Hour. We're glad to talk about it, and I do respond to each and every one of them. Well, let's get the show on the road, as they like to say. I'm going to introduce our business guest today. We're very fortunate to have Chuck Okay, Chuck, here we go. Knabusch.
Knabusch.
There, I get it. Knabusch. Ladies and gentlemen, I knew that was going to be a tongue twister for you, but it's a wonderful name, though. Chuck, you're a solution engineer. You own the company, 1310 Business Solutions. You've also written a book, and you're also a speaker. It's amazing. You've covered the waterfront as far as communications to business. Share with the audience a little bit of your business background and what brought you to where you are today.
Let me kind of work backwards a little bit. 2018, I retired. After a year of kind of all the quintessential retirement things, traveling with my wife said, you either need to find a job or you need to find a hobby. Well, on the face of that, it's kind of funny. But what she was really saying is she could recognize in me that I needed a bigger purpose, and she's right. After 28 years with Lazy Boy Incorporated, 14 in their headquarters, 14 down at a production plant, and 7 years before that with the U.S. Army and 2 years with the Army, with the Michigan Army National Guard, she knew that I was just the type of person that wanted a bigger purpose. So I went ahead and created 1310 Business Solutions, and it was perfect timing because my former employer called and said, would you come back? I did. Went back for about 16 months on a specific project. COVID hit. They said, Chuck, we got to let you go. I said, I understand. I've been there 28 years. So they let me go for COVID. 3 months later, they called once again and said, would you come back? We have the biggest backlog in our company's history. And our U.S. plants just cannot go ahead and fulfill them. We want to open up 2 manufacturing facilities south of the border in Mexico. And would you go ahead and help put those together? Because all of our resources north of the border with expertise, they're busy making furniture. So I said, sure. So 15 months, 18 months during COVID, I was commuting to Mexico, opening 2 plants down there. I've taken more COVID tests than any human probably ever should. But I wanted to get home and be able to see my wife, grandkids, family, that kind of thing. So you take the test, you deal with it. Never got diagnosed with COVID. And after that, I met with a business coach myself because I do believe in coaching. And he says, Chuck, all you need to do is tell people you're going to write a book. That kind of rubbed me wrong. He said, well, it'll give you all sorts of authority. He said, if I'm going to tell people I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a book. So I did. I wrote a book called Hope is Not a Business Strategy, How to Take Control of Your Business so the business doesn't take control of you. I see that a lot of small businesses, the business controls the entrepreneur rather than the entrepreneur controlling the business. And the book is just about my wife's and my experience dealing with contractors, because we've all had one, whether it's a plumber, an HVAC person, and some of the things that they have done phenomenally that didn't really cost them much of anything, and some things that they didn't do so well that, again, through very little cost, a little time, a little attention to detail, they could have changed, and it would probably increase their business, and people would talk very positively about them.
You know, the approach to starting a business, and I thought about it when I was reading your background and your material in preparation for the show. Writing the book was almost in the manual, right? To start a consultancy, mentoring, coaching business.
Yes.
It was kind of almost like a guidepost or something. You put it down and then you work from that. So your business coach gave you some good advice, at least half of what you need in one. And I agree, completing the book, and it gave you something to put down your philosophy and whatnot and run with it. What services do you offer someone who's looking for a coach?
I generally focus on the operational, on the repeatable processes. And then within that, my focus is on planning, leadership, and execution. So if you're not getting the results that you're expecting, you change a process, you want to do something, you might see that you've got a lot of turnover and you can't understand this process worked 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but it's not working now. Then I would go ahead and have a conversation, say, is it documented? Chances are the answer is no. Well, I just kind of show them what to do. And then when they decide to leave, I bring somebody new in, they show them what to do. And, I can tell you're of the same kind of age group that I am. That's like the old telephone game. And by the time it gets to the end of the chain, the message is nothing like what we started out with. And unfortunately, too many businesses kind of depend on that. So if you really want to go ahead and have the process followed, you need to go ahead and have it documented. Because give them the notes. I mean, that doesn't mean it can't improve. Doesn't mean that it won't improve, because we as humans love to improve things. So let them improve it, but then let's update the documentation.
What comes to my mind is that you're saying that is what we used to call chalk talk. So you outline the process, and then you go through and say, okay, what could I do differently here? Use that eraser, right? And then think through, does it work? Does it improve? Been in a number of meetings like that over my career, trying to make the process more efficient, or work, for whatever that meant at the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I agree, a lot of small business people don't spend much, if any, time documenting. And I was blessed to go out in my family business where it happened to be my father. It's a responsibility, but he would document and then have somebody else kind of edit it or go through it and make sure it made sense, then present it, so documentation was critical.
Well, one of the big things we hear today about small businesses, scale, scale, scale. Well, how do you scale something and hand it off to somebody if it's not documented? If they don't know what the performance metrics are, if they don't know what the steps are in the process, if they don't know what's the input and what's the expected outcome. And realistically, I hear scale all the time, but then my next question is, have you documented the process? Well, no. Well, if you haven't documented the process, that's going to lead to micromanagement. Why? Because now you have to make every decision, because only you understand the metrics and only you understand the output. And just that's one of those things that really goes ahead and constrains a small business or an entrepreneur from scaling, is because they didn't take the time. And I know it's not glamorous. I started out as a programmer at Lazy Boy, and we hated to go ahead and document things, but it needed to be done because we knew we were not going to be the ones owning that program for our whole career. If we wanted to move on, somebody else was going to have to maintain it, and they needed the documentation.
Yeah, you make a great point. And like I alluded to earlier, having the documentation, the idea that you want to at least review or update or change wherever you are, that you have a document that you can sit down and, like my father, bring other people into the process to, it just ultimately creates a better process. But don't put it on the shelf and leave it there for a period of time. It may be a year, it may be 5 years. It depends on the industry and what's going on. Of course, with all the technology today, and when you get into that quagmire, is what I call AI. Your competition is out there doing things to make their process more efficient. I promise you, at least the best ones are. And I think that treadmill is getting faster and faster, and the change is coming faster and faster. And it's interesting to watch that. I think it's a real challenge, though, for people to.
Oh, I agree. Because again, change is happening, and going back and redocumenting that, not glamorous, but it's amazing how you can go ahead and give an AI, hey, here's my process, give it a quick review. Sometimes it will go ahead and come back and say, ooh, look at this or look at that. Sometimes it gets it absolutely wrong. So, I think we're not quite to the point where we can turn everything over to AI. And I don't know if I want to see that or not, to be honest. But realistically, it's another set of eyes. And sometimes in a small business, you don't have a lot of other eyes. Again, I come from a bigger corporation. And my wife at one point in time was the scheduling manager. Well, she was over scheduling the upholstery, scheduling the leather cutting, scheduling the plywood cutting facilities. And she had each of the individual schedulers, document what they did. And then she made them all rotate and change places for a day, because she wanted to test, does the documentation work? Because you're right, you don't want to just put it on the shelf. You don't want to go ahead and let it gather dust. You want to say, does it work? And the neat thing is, next time somebody was out on vacation, we could go ahead and pull that down. And we knew a vacation was going to happen, it wasn't going to take a year. We could pull that process down and we could go ahead and utilize that process. And again, retest it. And if not, chances are they weren't on vacation for that long, so it wasn't a major problem, like if they had left the company. So you're testing it in a very safe environment.
Well, and in a way, you're constantly testing it. We do things like that.
Absolutely.
You happen to hit on one of my favorite tools that I learned, and that's switching people out.
Yeah.
When I was very young in the initial business of families, and they would take the person at the end of the line and swap them with the person in the front at least once a year, because you do things at the front end that affect the back end,
Right.
and so on and so forth. And it was pretty amazing how it improved not only communication and whatnot, but it improved the process, because I'm up front and I know I need to do certain things and I'm not doing them consistently or whatever. And this makes me realize what I'm doing at the back end, making the job harder, less efficient, and less effective. So yeah, your wife, we're kindred spirits on that. I will tell you that that's a tool I think is
Absolutely.
wonderful tool. Well, let me ask you, what you've been in the service, the Army, you've been, you mentioned programmer, worked for a large family business. You worked in Mexico for, I don't know how long a period that was. So you've worked, outside of the United States. You've had a lot of different kind of experience in general. What have you found is really the key to your success?
Listening. Listening to the people who do the job. Talk to them about what the outcome is, what it is that you're looking to get. But we as humans are phenomenal at making improvements, finding shortcuts, finding easier ways. And as long as it doesn't impact the product or service, I'm all for it. I took over as production manager of one plant. And previously, I had heard that all those employees, there were about 200, had been told, if you don't like the way things are done, the road outside runs north and south, and go find another job. I'm like, oh my God, that's not what we want. But they had been told, and it was a very physical, demanding job. And they were told, well, what we want is we want your muscle. We want you to take that sheet of plywood. We want you to flip it, put it on the router. We want you to seal it down. We want to cut parts. We want you to pick parts. And my first day, I said, no. Yes, we're going to go ahead and use your physical muscles, but I want your mind. Because nobody knows how to do that job better than you, the person doing the job. I said, I can give you all sorts of guidance. I can give you a whole nother perspective. But because I'm not the one doing the job, I need to be able to listen to you. I want you to come to me with ideas. I knew every year I was going to, one of the requirements from corporate was going to be to overcome the economics. And what we meant by economics is the price increases, the healthcare increases, but also the raises. Well, how do we go ahead and do that? Do we do it with better yield? That's one way. Do we do it with more efficiency? Well, everybody thought, well, now you're taking money out of my pocket. Well, but I can't give you money if I can't go ahead and find a better way to do it. And who better to engage with that than the actual individual doing it? And they were like amazed. They said, Chuck, we've never heard this before. We've never heard that we wanted, we were hired for our brain. We were just labor. No. I want more than just labor, because, we as humans are always thinking. We're always finding a better way. We're finding a shortcut. Some of those shortcuts impact and quality in a good way, but some also in a bad way. So I want to know the shortcut. I want to consult with you, even when I was their manager, their leader, to say, is this a good thing or is this not? And then how do we go ahead and do it better? Because you've got an idea here. I'm not going to say no. We just may have to tweak it a little bit. We may have to go ahead and look at what the impact is and say, well, I like your idea, but can we twist it a little bit from this impact and get the same thing that you got, which is a little more efficiency, and still maintain that quality? And they were amazed by it. But it was just because I was willing to open up and listen.
Kind of an inverse of that. I was dealing with a situation recently with I mentioned to you, I mentor a couple of business roundtables. One is nonprofits. And one of the big topics this month was, we're talking about increasing our prices, like to attend to the gala, do this, that. And so my question right back at him, I said, now, why do you need to increase your prices? Well, it's just something, and I got that, and no slight on the nonprofits. The
Right.
businesses do the same damn thing.
Absolutely.
Profits off, we need to raise prices. And I tried to convey, unfortunately, and I apologize to the group, I got a little frustrated and said, instead of your board sitting there just saying you need to increase prices because the price of bread went up and totally unrelated reasons, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
In other words, assuming you take in X dollars, by the way, your current net income, if you will, it's up. Oh, but you hadn't increased prices, right? And I said, what are you doing with the excess funds that you have available? Well, we've talked about some things. I said, the price is at the end of the train, and try to go through a process and understand it. And it's like you say, talking to the individual that are on the line, that are out there making it happen. And I love the idea of tying it to a pay increase. The company, that's a foreign concept. The company has to make additional revenue. It has to have that coming in to be available. One of the groups, and I'll finish up on the nonprofits, big challenge she had. People expect now an annual review, but the word review and raise have become one.
Right.
What do I do? But that's what it was. That's how it was framed before.
Oh,
they
absolutely.
didn't know what they were doing, but it created a monster,
Well, I mean, and to go with your nonprofit, a lot of years ago, I went to a school board. It was up in Michigan. And, listening to their CFO say, well, revenue's down from what we get from the state. The state's not giving us as much money. We have an income problem, and this and on they went. But the one thing I never heard during that school board, during that discussion, is what are we doing to go ahead and lower costs? I mean, whether it's supplies or it's janitorial supplies, or it's back then they used to go ahead and provide paper and pencils and everything else to the students. I know that's not the way it is today. I mean, you get the long laundry list to go to Walmart right before school starts for your kids or grandkids. But I'm like, there's two sides of this coin. Yeah, like any business, revenue may be down some years, income may be down some years, but what are you doing that you can control to go ahead and make up the difference? And that was like an absolutely foreign concept to the school board, simply because, they're kind of a semi-governmental body, and they just go ahead and think of it on the income side rather than on the cost side.
No, you make a great point. In fact, there's been a number of articles published in the business press in the last 2 or 3 weeks, some at the very large corporate level and some not so, like, we're going to cut our costs 20%. And I sit back and I say, 20%? What does that look like? Well, they don't know. They just set that as a target based on the numbers. And I'm sure they develop plans and what gets cut and take a hard look here and there. But I think the key is, or one of the keys to make it a better process, is what you mentioned earlier. It's getting involvement from the people that are front line.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that proves itself time and again. One of the things I personally love to do is identify companies, businesses, small, medium, large, that in my mind are really good at what they do. And you will go through and you'll find certain points. In fact, there's been In Search of Excellence, a book I read years ago and just loved the concepts.
Yes.
And you find even the big guys executing on certain ideas and processes and things that made them different. It's kind of like the example you gave before we came on the air about, well, we have great customer service. It's what sets us apart. They don't even answer the phone.
Right.
Well,
I guess their definition of customer service was totally different than mine, but and that's one of the things I talk about in my book, but I also talk about with business owners or business leaders, is you need to be able to set expectations, and then you need to manage them. I mean, a great example, we were building a pool during COVID. Probably hundreds of them were built during COVID. Why? Because we were all staying home, had nothing better to do. Well, so I'd ask the contractor, how long is this going to take? He said, well, typically about 6 weeks from the time we turn dirt. But Chuck, slow down. We probably can't turn dirt for 4 to 6 weeks. Okay. Again, I had no problem with any of that because he was setting expectation. Now, I was asking him to. Now, unfortunately, it took us 18 months to go ahead and put the pool in. Why? Well, he lost a lot of his subs, had to find new ones, but at no time did he manage those expectations. And instead, as a consumer, as a customer, I was getting frustrated. I mean, my backyard looked like Lebanon in the 1980s. I mean, it was just a shambles. And when I'd ask about it, well, no, that's been done. No, that hasn't. Oh, well, because he wasn't coming out on site. He wasn't checking. I mean, if it was a COVID concern, we would have had no problems staying inside. Well, he could go ahead and inspect the site. But they weren't coming out on site. They weren't checking on things. And all he had to do, because we, like most of America, we were certainly giving grace to those people that we were interacting with. And all he had to do is say, I lost my sub for that. I want you to do the best quality job that's possible. So it's going to take me a few weeks or a couple of months to find a new subcontractor to do that aspect. And we would have said, sure, no problem. Instead, he left us hanging with that. Take a couple of months to get started, take us 6 weeks. And, we're now in month 6 instead of week 6, and it's still not done. We're in month 12 and it's still not done. We're now in month 18 and finally we're putting water in the pool. So it can be frustrating from the other perspective, and it wouldn't have taken him or cost him. Because again, I understand small business owners don't have money to throw at problems like corporate America. But all it would have taken is a phone call or an email or a text saying, hey, this happened. Be honest, be authentic, be a little bit vulnerable sometimes, and say, this happened to me, but you are important to me, so it's going to take me a little time, and we'll still go ahead and get it done. We'll get it done to that same quality that I expect, but we're going to have to give up a little time because I have to find a new subcontractor.
That message has so many pieces to it. One thing you mentioned is what all he had to do was communicate, but really what he needed, I think, before that is have the mindset. And when you ask that question, well, what does your business, how do you, well, we offer great customer service, but we don't answer the phone with a human voice, which, gosh, I can't tell you. In fact, last week I was a small group of people, business people, and we were just shooting some ideas around. And that was still a big deal for a majority of the people around that table was the human voice. Mm-hmm. I think part of it is they equated, if you don't have a human voice, then you get bounced around. What can you do? Push button 3 and it just, you're lost. But I have to warn you, fair warning to you and everyone who's listening, one of the participants in that discussion claims to be doing a beta test himself. Small business, has about 7 to 10 employees, 2 people in the office, and one in particular answers the phone. They have an AI-based product that answers the phone in your voice, right? Because we've read about that or heard about it. And it responds to your questions. So push 1 if you want that. Now, it's not part of the program. And it's available at a price that small businesses, but he's part of a beta testing on it because he's a fairly innovative guy, even though he's in a basic, bread and butter business, but he second generation. So it's interesting. And we are all in that group. We want to hear next month, okay, how's it going? Because then you truly can, if it works, replace somebody being on the phone, or at least cover the lunchtime or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. And in my network, as I talk to people, and I love having the conversations, even if I'm not engaging with them kind of on a professional level. And I've had one who does an AI who does that with voice, but they also go ahead and do it with chat on their on websites, and how they go ahead and build it out. So it's fascinating, and I think it's getting better. I was up in Michigan this past weekend and wanted to order a pizza, so I called in, and it said, would you like to go ahead and use our AI voice prompt? And I'm like, okay, rather than take somebody away from making the pizza and putting it in the oven, I'll go ahead and do that. And it was a seamless type of order process. They got that I wanted, this specialty item or that specialty item and how I wanted it done. Really understood, because we all have some accents that sometimes AI doesn't always get. it was able to go ahead and pick up on it very, very well. And I wasn't really fond, and I did not go ahead and give it my credit card number. I said, I'll just pay when I pick it up. And it had no problem with that. But I mean, what a great interactive experience. And I didn't feel like it was an automated experience where you're right, I'm pushing 1, push 3. Now put in the last 4 of your social security number. Now type in your telephone number and your address and your height and your weight and whatever else.
And like it's endless, and you're really not sure if they're getting it at all. You know, it's kind of iffy. You know, I'm sitting here smiling a little bit. Ultimately, the receptionist becomes an AI type configuration. Going back to some of my early training when I was in the family business, I was trained. In this case, it again was my father, and he one day says, "The lady at the front," because I said something, because they weren't the brightest bulb, because it was a boring job. I mean, really. But we had 30 plus people in the office, and we had multitude of locations, so we're getting calls. And he says, but it's the single most important job on this floor, meaning the office. And that took a while. You know, of course, I analyzed and thought about it. And so here was this gal, again, nice person, but, you know, bored. She wasn't, because she wasn't, you know, but how important she was.
And they need to know a lot about the business that you wouldn't expect. Why? Because they can go ahead and field calls.
Right.
You never know what's coming in. And they can say, oh, well, that really goes to Bob, even though normally it goes to Lou, simply because I know what Bob's kind of working on. I don't have to be into everything, but because I know a little bit about what's going on, they could go ahead and add value in a way that you never would have predicted or you never would have put down on paper.
Typically the lowest paid in the office staff. Now we're talking about, and this is where I find it interesting, of replacing that critical job. Some, I'm sure, put different value on the job, but it's still an important job in every business. Maybe they don't consider as important as my father and others I was trained under do. But we're going to replace it with an AI product. That is a very interesting proposition.
Oh, absolutely. It's scary.
As far as I can, you know. But anyway, just interesting conversation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth with Chuck about the management process, what he does, the things he looks for that are important, because I think he has a lot of great information, and hopefully you'll agree with me. So please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Car enthusiasts of Conroe, FM 104.5 and 106.1 Lone Star Community Radio invites you to shift into gear every Monday from 1 to 2 with Cruising Car Club Talk with Robert and Randy for news on all things automotive in the greater Houston-Conroe area. Can't make a live show? We've got you covered. You can find all of our uncut content, including full episodes, on Spotify, iTunes, Play Store, YouTube, Facebook, and irlonestar.com. Again, that's Mondays 1 to 2, Cruising Car Club Talk with Robert and Randy. See you there.
Welcome back. This is the Weekly Business Hour. Rick Schlissel. We've been having a wonderful conversation, at least in my mind, hopefully in yours, with my friend Chuck K. How about that? See? Chuck and I have been talking about, a lot of different things about business scenarios. And I thought we'd start off this section of the show and talk a little bit about the process. I mean, Chuck's a coach, mentor, consultant, different names, but, you know, as a business coach, talk about some of the things that you focus on when you're working with a client.
Well, you know, a lot of it, I like to get down to the foundation. I mean, and I understand that back in the 80s, 90s, it was real popular. Everybody had to have values. And I still believe in it, not just to go ahead and have a list of things that you put up on the wall, but, you know, what does your company really believe in? And are you using them? And the first thing you do is you ask an employee, oh, no, yeah, those are just something that we put on the wall. Because if you're using them to go ahead and as the prism through which you look to make all your decisions, to go ahead and interact with your customers, to interact with your suppliers and your employees, it shows something. because that's when we go ahead and then start looking at, okay, what project, what performance metrics do you have? Does everything align? Because when something's misaligned, go ask a chiropractor. When something's misaligned, you're going to go ahead and feel the pain. Maybe not today, but certainly down the road. So I like to talk about, what are your values? I like to go ahead and say, what's the vision? Well, I just want to get bigger. Anybody can get bigger, and there's a lot of ways to go ahead and do it, but is that really what you want? So having those conversations and making sure people, business leaders of all levels, whether it's the founder, an entrepreneur, it could be a department head, can articulate what it is they're trying to go ahead and do. I mean, that's always step one. Because if you can't go ahead and set your destination, how do you go ahead and set a direction to get there? So it's really important to go ahead and do that. And once we kind of have that understanding, and that can be a conversation, could be something we dig into, then we start saying, what are your problems? And just because the business owner, the business leader sees a problem, might not be their exact problem. I was working with a $20 million educational furniture manufacturer a little while back, and I want lean. I want to go ahead and put in lean. Big lean proponent. I think there's a lot of wonderful things. But do we have to go ahead and jump through every little name? So I said, what is it you really want? Do you mind if I tour your facility? Absolutely. So I did. So as I'm touring the facility, I see the vice president of operations moving materials from one place to another. So after he finishes, I stop. I say, hey, I get introduced. So, what are you going to do next? He says, well, I'm going to see if anyone else needs materials. I'm going to be looking around. And I said, well, that's what concerns me. He said, what do you mean? I said, as a leader, I think it's great that leaders jump in at any level and they can go ahead and move the materials. But in some ways, that's a feel good. Yeah, it doesn't really add value. Yes, it needed to happen for the customer's perspective, but it didn't need the vice president of operations to do it. No. He had a team of material handlers. So I said, to me, it's far more important to be asking a few questions. He said, like what? Well, what prevented the material handlers from knowing that this material needed to go ahead and be moved? Or what precluded them from doing that move? Maybe they were busy with something else. Lots of reasons. But, fixing that problem, maybe there was no visibility. Maybe those materials weren't available. Maybe, they were busy doing something else. There can be 100 different reasons. But fixing that problem would really add value from that vice president's perspective, not just pushing the materials on a cart from point A to point B. And I said, if you really were checking out your actual costs versus standards, you would go ahead and see that was the most expensive materials that you guys have ever produced. Well, why is that? Because I suspect you get paid a little bit differently than what those material handlers get paid. So, I think it's important to go ahead and have those conversations. I ended up engaging with that particular organization in doing a lot of preliminary steps, setting the foundation. While I was working with them, they ended up changing out their plant manager to a guy who had a phenomenal lead experience. And he and I were talking. He's like, Chuck, before we can even do lean, we don't even have job descriptions. I said, well, funny you should ask. I said, we did that in my first 2 weeks here. He said, well, nobody told me. So I emailed them to him. He said, well, next thing we need to do, we need to talk about leader standard work. I said, well, funny you should ask. We did that in kind of week 3. He said, well, nobody told me. I said, well, so obviously now you also have a communication problem within your organization. But where their chief human resource officer had been given the task of coming up with job descriptions 2 years previously, it took us 2 weeks to do it. What did we do? We sat down with those first line supervisors. We sat down with those employees, said, tell me what your job is and describe it using, and I gave them a format. I mean, there's a million of them out there on the internet. Fill out this form. I don't care if you handwrite it. I can type. That's not a big deal. But, not just what you do, but what you should be doing and you may not be. Every one of those employees knew exactly. And they filled it out, and within 2 weeks, we had job descriptions. We had leader standard work. We had all sorts of things because they wanted to be able to have employees move from one machine to another. Well, how do you do that without training? So do we have any training materials? Well, no. So I said, okay, send a supervisor with me. Let's wheel out a whiteboard on, I love whiteboards. Wheel a whiteboard out onto the floor, and let's go ahead and step it through with the operator. So he did. I put it into a format. I said, now the supervisor is trained to go ahead and do it. Well, he doesn't have any time. So I did it for all the machines. But now they had the training documents, and all they needed was to create the skills matrix as to how to jump from point A to point B and get the people trained and which ones are trained so we can move them around. So, yeah, they wanted lean. I knew we could go ahead and deliver lean. Actually, they ended up hiring a person who was probably even better. But it was all about, let's put the fundamentals in first. Yeah, lean might be the symptom of what you want, but let's talk about the root cause. And as business leaders, we're feeling the symptoms. We can go ahead and see that we're bleeding here. Well, let's go ahead and look a little bit deeper. And that's where I come in. I provide that perspective. All of us as leaders, we can't always see our blind spot, and we need somebody else to help us.
Well, I 100% agree with you, and I've been there and done it, but not because I've done what you've done or not done. Everybody has a different approach, but the idea that two things. One is this show, when we started the first 2 years, I kept a little poll, and all the guests I had in 2 years, 50 plus people, I tried to gauge based on the conversations, materials, and how successful they appear to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were solos, some had 20 employees, some had 50, some had 5, some were growing, a mix, right? Scientifically, probably not as much as it should be. But anyway, at the end of the day, the businesses that I felt were successful, they were going to be around and they were moving forward. 95% of them, that's the number, had a mentor, or possibly had one and they outgrew them or whatever. And when you asked them that question, because that was a question that was on every show I asked, did you have somebody help you? Will they bring up a mentor? And oddly enough, I found that basically the ones that were the most enthusiastic, now there's no way for me to measure that, about the value of that mentor, the consultant, the coach, was the ones that I sensed that really were going to go far with what they were doing. So the other thing, the first point you made about asking people their direction or where they're going, it's funny. One of the things I found out about 15 years ago, and I started doing this and really enjoy it. In fact, I haven't done much of it lately, but people want to start a business or their new business, and they'll find it hard to find somebody that will sit down and take some time and talk to them. Silver Fox Group that I'm part of, very few want to take on the new business because of the high failure rate and so on and so forth. And I do. I take those, when I was practicing full time, I would take those on, whether I made money or lost money, because I was always curious. I sit down and have a cup of coffee. I give them an hour and say, tell me about your business. Tell me why you want to do this. Tell me what your goals are. And about half of them, I will try to talk them out of going in that business or even going into business, right? And try to lay that out to them. I find that it is very, very hard, but it sounds like you've had some success, so I'm curious, in getting a business owner to really convey or put into words what their objective is. In other words, I'm going to start this business. I'm taking on these risks. This is what I'm going to do. And you ask them a question, which is a standard question for me now. Well, when do you want to exit the business? As we sit here today, what does that look like to you? Well, I want to work the rest of my career, 20 years, whatever. And I said, well, how much do you want to walk away with? In other words, what value does the business? Because a vast majority of businesses, small businesses, they just lock the door and walk away.
Right.
And then we talk about buyer, and that's kind of a strategic buyer, that. But people have the hardest time, or many people do, not everybody, what is it I want to do with this business? Well, my dad always claimed is most small business people, they're just looking for a job. they control versus
Right.
working in an environment where they're an employee. And I always teased him. I said, well, you got a hell of a job there, what you did with this business, you and the family. But the idea is they can't put it together, which I personally think puts them at a big, big disadvantage as they go down the road.
Well, I think it's a double disadvantage. And one, because in a job, most jobs, especially bigger employer, they're going to have a 401k plan. They're going to have a pension plan. They're going to have something where you put some money aside. But the entrepreneur probably is not doing that. So if they're not planning on selling their business, and just close the doors, now they have nothing to fall back on. No retirement, no, Social Security, but that's not necessarily always enough to live on. So they need to go ahead and think that through. I've talked to a number of people now in my network who they specialize in that, in evaluating the business and how to go ahead and create that. I'm more like, I don't specialize in that part, but I can always make connections. But realistically, if you're documenting stuff, now you've got something to go ahead and sell, because you can sell a process. You're selling more than the tables and chairs that you sit at and your computer to go ahead and do something. You're selling more than the list of your customers, which, and nowadays with AI, with the internet, I can probably get a list of customers pretty easily. I can probably find out what your list of customers is. If I'm really hell bent on that. So that doesn't have the value that it did, let's say 20 or 30 years ago. So realistically, I think that's an important question. You need to think about your exit strategy. And the best time to think about it is when you're entering the business, is what am I going to go ahead and create? And what am I going to go ahead and do? And we've all heard about the companies, whether it's a small communications company that made a modem way back in the day and were able to go ahead and sell it to Microsoft, and all of a sudden it's in every computer known to man. Absolutely. Those are the wonderful stories. But, even the small business here and there. I just had my lawn service guy. He decided to exit the business and he sold his business. I didn't get involved in that. But hopefully it was more than just a Rolodex of names. It was all the notes of what those customers like about their lawn, how they want their lawn cut, because that's going to go ahead and make that transition far more frictionless than otherwise. Otherwise, you're going to go ahead and struggle. Well, they didn't do the same thing that the previous guy did, and supposedly they bought the business. Well, what information got passed other than the mowers and the weed eaters?
In the Rolodex.
Yeah.
No, you make a wonderful point. Rich Hall, who is a Silver Fox advisor, specializes in working with people to sell their business, not just the sale, but building,
right,
putting the blocks and things in place over a period of years, preferably, that you get there. And the idea that I'm going to be in this business for 5 years, 10, 20, there are important decisions along the way, like borrowing money that can be
right,
impacted on what the exit strategy is. Training somebody to run the business so that you have that to sell and can appeal to that particular group of buyers who want management in place.
right.
And you start, these are not hard questions, but it got to the point, I will say, in my practice where I wouldn't take a client on who couldn't answer those questions.
Well,
I would work with them to help them do it.
Absolutely.
But when you get that blank stare and then I don't have time, then you don't.
Well, most small business people are so busy, working between the trees, putting out the fires, whatever analogy you want to go ahead and use, that they don't get that chance to step back. Even me, when I retired from Lazy Boy and I got a chance to step back, in that first year of retirement, one of the things I did a lot was think through some of the decisions I made. Yes, I made them with the best information I had at the time. Could they have been better? Absolutely. But now I finally had something that I didn't have when I was doing the job, and that was perspective. And that's where, the mentor, the consultant, the coach, whatever you want to go ahead and term it, that's what they give, because you're going to have some blind spots. You're going to have not complete information, but sometimes somebody else can see something that you can't. And it's really important to go ahead and get that additional perspective.
it's like having somebody, as I've had people put it like this, to ask the tough questions.
Yeah.
Just somebody that is there to make sure that you succeed in a way that matches what you want to succeed. Like, even I've had issues with people, their personality, their character, their characteristics, and they want to go in this business. And I say, well, you realize heavy customer service. Well, I don't really like people that much, that's but I mean,
Right.
you can almost see that they're going to have a difficult time. Doesn't mean they're not smart, doesn't mean they can't be successful, but there's a matching that goes on to be the most efficient, and so on and so forth.
And it's always better to have that person outside the business
I
because
agree.
they don't have an agenda. They're not looking
Right.
to take your spot. They're not looking to go ahead and move up the corporate ladder. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having somebody inside the business you can bounce some ideas. But again, a lot of business owners, a lot of business leaders cannot share everything because it could be a sign of weakness in today's society. It could go ahead and mean that somebody else that they're talking to might be shooting for their job. And it is. I mean, it's a dog eat dog society that we're in some cases, or even in corporate America. So, part of it is to have somebody who really doesn't care about all that noise and is just focused on you and wanting your business to be the best business that it can be.
Right. And if it's you, your family,
Right.
that's a whole nother discussion with your family and their involvement and so on and so forth. No, I mean, you're dead on. And I encourage people every time I get an opportunity, and on the show a number of times, to bring a mentor coach on board, whatever the relationship and what you can afford or whatever you can. Because to me, it's one of those things you cannot afford not to do it. It really is.
Right.
It may seem a little, like silly putty. You really can't get your hands on it, but it is really something different. Again, 95% of the people I just at random
Mm-hmm.
in Montgomery County that I could peg as potentially successful in what they were doing had a mentor.
Right.
And again, though, some of them gave credit to those people. And you read those stories. I mean, I know it's true.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody, but it's there. It makes all the difference. The big guys have these people because they got thousands of people, and they can find somebody or go outside and hire one of those big dollar, huge consulting companies. But it's there for the small business as well.
Absolutely.
Makes your journey more pleasant, makes your journey more successful for what you're looking for. And that's big in my mind. You and your family, what it is that you're looking for. And we're all different. And that's one of the reasons people go in business. I went in business because I was looking for something different.
Mm-hmm.
After being part of a successful family business, I said, well, I've got 30 years of education. Now I'm going to go try to use that and see what I can do.
Absolutely.
We've got a couple minutes left. I wanted to touch again. You've written a book, and we haven't really talked about it. Who should read this book?
Anyone who can't sleep at night? No, realistically. Small business leaders. I wrote it. I wrote it in such a way that you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can go ahead and find a problem that you're having, find a similar problem in the book, and look at the perspective that I give, the potential solutions, the alternatives, the things that you can look at. If you're struggling with a certain area, you can go to a certain part of the book and say, well, this isn't working for me. Oh, here's some ideas, or here's some tools. I hate to say tips and tricks because it's not tricks. It's putting in the blocking and tackling of business. But yeah, business leaders of all size, whether it's a department head or it's an owner, it's a CEO of a small organization, because this talks in terms of contractors, like HVAC, plumbers, and that kind of thing. Why? Because I think there's a lot of things you can learn, both good and bad, out there from all these little small businesses. And it doesn't take corporate America. It doesn't take a department of people. It doesn't take $100,000 to solve the problems.
Well, and I haven't read the book, so I've let everybody know that, but I've kind of look through online and your principles and whatnot that you adhere to. It is not one of these books that come about all the time, it seems, especially in marketing, the latest and greatest idea, and it's here today, gone tomorrow. And I used to run into people and say, are you doing XYZ, that book that was written on the New York Times bestseller list? And I said, well, no, I haven't got, this is a book about basics, as you call it, blocking and tackling. And it has ideas that can help you. From my take on it, I'm going to read it, but is that it helps you solve everyday real problems.
I think from what some of the reviewers have said, it's very pragmatic.
Yeah, it's a good tool. I encourage people to check it out. It's available on Amazon as well as at your website. And speaking of that, if people want to get in touch with you, talk about what we talked about today, or perhaps engage you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, if you want to learn more about me, go out to my website. It's 13ten.com, 13ten.com, 1310. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty regular. You can go ahead and shoot me an email at chuck@1310.com. And yeah, I don't answer everything immediately because I don't sit at my computer. I'm usually trying to help people. But yeah, I mean, within a day or so, you'll get a response back because I am checking it on my phone, no matter what my wife says. And I'll go ahead and shoot a response, and we'll try and go ahead and set up a time to chat. Because again, I think being able to be interactive rather than kind of asynchronous that texting or email is, it's better to go ahead and be far more interactive in real time. And have a chat, whether that's a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever works. But yeah, I'd love to go ahead and talk to any of your listeners and have those conversations. Maybe it's a fit, maybe it's not. And, maybe you'll learn something. Even if it's not a fit, we're not looking to go ahead and charge. I do this more as a purpose in my life. Yeah, I like to make a couple dollars, but I don't let the dollars go ahead and dictate everything either.
Right. Well, Chuck, I can't thank you enough. And I want to extend that invitation to you. You're welcome back anytime. If you've got a new subject or something you think people would benefit, just reach out to me, because you've got a lot of good things here, a lot of basic things, but small business people, many of us need to be reminded of. In a sense, my take on it, we've been leaving things on the table, money, success, and whatnot, because we don't have the tools or the knowledge or experience or someone helping direct us in the right direction. And it's right there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us today. Put a note on your calendar. Next week, 11 a.m., right here on Lone Star Community Radio. We'll be back. And a video podcast of today's show will be posted in the next 48 to 72 hours. Just go to Facebook, YouTube, all the social media sites. Look for the weekly business hour page, and you'll find a posting of this show and a number of them going back quite a while. And as I tell you each week when we do this show, until next week, stay engaged and always keep your focus on what counts in your business. Thanks.